father works at the mine, he is absent from home every month. Unfortunately, I found convincing evidence that my mother was unfaithful to him. My mother, who suffers from muscular dystrophy, cannot work due to her condition. She cannot stand on her feet for more than 2 hours in a row and has difficulty finding a job that allows her to sit. Being their only child, I found myself in a situation where a few weeks after my 17th birthday, only my mother and I were at home, and my father was at work. After finishing my studies at school, I returned home, but found that my mother was not there. Although her car was parked outside the house, I wasn't worried at first, as she often ran errands or went to a doctor's appointment, which usually took about an hour. But as the hours went by, my anxiety grew. When 6 hours had passed and she still wasn't in sight, I decided to call. Grabbing the phone, I dialed her number and was surprised to hear her ringtone coming from the living room. Perplexed, I found that the forgotten phone was lying on the couch, which further fueled my curiosity. Deciding to satisfy my curiosity, I couldn't resist snooping. Having previously assisted her in setting up an app on her phone, I was aware of her passcode. While dancing through her messages, I stumbled upon a conversation where he mentioned waiting for someone to pick her up. Let's refer to this person as James. Surprisingly, James happened to be the boyfriend of Carol, my mom's closest friend. My curiosity piqued. I continued scrolling through the text messages and was confronted with a disturbing image of James in an explicit state. The sight was so repulsive that it almost caused me to become physically ill, leaving me in utter shock and disbelief about my mom's involvement. She sent him a video in which she was put in a compromising position. Although their faces were hidden, it was noticeable to anyone who was familiar with them. It was like a sudden shock, as if ice water had been splashed on my face. I felt disgusted. It was impossible to imagine that James and my mom were exchanging candid pictures. It was hard to get it out of my head. It seemed that they had been conducting text negotiations for a long time. Another message that caught my attention was the words of Mom, "I want us to do it again." Although it was not easy to navigate through the messages, an irresistible curiosity forced me not to stop there. Delving into unfiltered content, I noticed a recurring topic of discussion about intimacy. Intrigued, I took screenshots of the conversation on my mobile device. Soon after, I noticed a familiar car pulling up to our house. Looking out the window, I saw that my mom was being dropped off by none other than Carol, her closest friend. Amazing, isn't it? I had a suspicion that the guy Carol used her car and came for my mom, judging by their recent text conversation. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tried to get a better look at her from the window to determine who dropped her off, Carol or her boyfriend James. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to really look at how the car left. I waited patiently until Mom came into the house and asked who dropped her off. She confirmed that it was indeed her best friend Carol. I was confused. I thought maybe she was lying, but I wasn't sure. Mom and Carol have been best friends for over 3 years. Mom told me that they met in one of the internet groups and have been friends ever since, and she comes to our house mostly when my dad leaves for work. Her boyfriend James doesn't come often, and I've only seen him a few times. I left her phone on the coffee table before she came into the house. Mom took the phone and started texting with someone, smiling and laughing as she walked into the bedroom. I looked at her from across the room, disgusted and ashamed. I've seen her do it a few times over the years, but I never thought she was doing something nefarious. Carol and other strangers had given her rides before, and I never thought about it. The only difference now was the graphical test conversation I saw between them and her best friend's boyfriend, James. I thought I grew up in a loving home, with a hardworking father and a loving mother. Although I knew that my mom could help around the house a lot more, but she doesn't cook or clean. My father and I do all the work, and after her illness it became even worse. I've always blamed it on depression and her illness because I love my mom. I thought she was protected, beautiful, and successful. Due to her disability, her mental state began to deteriorate, and I do not dare to call her relationship with my father ideal. Although they rarely enter into conflicts and disputes, this is mainly due to the gentle and non-confrontational nature of the father, rather than genuine harmony. They lack the tenderness that is usually inherent in married couples. However, after discovering these messages, my idea of Mom has changed significantly. I discovered a side of her personality that was previously unknown to me: manipulative, deceitful, and fundamentally defective. Accepting the reality that she was a morally dubious person was difficult. At first I decided to trust her without making any judgments, but now I began to closely observe her actions. 3 days passed, and still there was no father. When I returned from school, I found that my mother was not at home again, and her car was parked at the entrance. I decided to call her on the phone, and she informed me that she was staying with a friend, and did not know when she would return. Out of curiosity, I decided to check her location on the iPad, and to my surprise, it confirmed that she was indeed in Carol's house. I decided to look into her messages on the iPad, and then I came across indisputable evidence of my mom and James's romantic relationship. But this time, I went further, and looked into the conversation between Mom and her closest friend, Carol. To my amazement, Carol shared photos of an abundance of adult toys that the three of them were going to try out. It shocked me that Carol knew about their affair. I have seen enough explicit materials to be familiar with the concept of threesome intimacy and understand the true nature of the relationship between my mom's best friend and her boyfriend, while my father remained in the dark. It became clear to me that my mother was involved in this whole horror, which shocked me. I came across text messages exchanged between my mom and her best friend, and it turned out that this underground behavior has been going on for several years. In addition, the issues of joining various groups and meeting other people were discussed, which indicates a recurring pattern. I took screenshots of text messages using my phone. These messages contained lengthy conversations between my mom and her best friend, in which the question was discussed that they had something in excess at home. Apparently, the father was not aware of their actions. In addition, I noticed that James sent his mother a message in which he expressed a desire to visit her house and show inappropriate behavior. But Mom firmly outlined her boundaries, saying that she would never cross this line. She also expressed concern about the possible impact on me if such actions take place. As I draw conclusions myself, it turns out that my mother often deletes messages, most likely in order not to be seen. Some text conversations that I had previously observed and captured in photographs have mysteriously disappeared. In an unusual way, my mom's closest friend, Carol, once again drove her to the house. This time I caught a glimpse of Carol's expression as she said goodbye to my mom. When Mom returned to the door, a sense of satisfaction emanated from her. It seems that she has always carried this happiness with her. Until recently, I didn't notice any changes in my mother's behavior. It was unusual for her to spend so much time away from home when my father was around. My father, who started from the very bottom and achieved a high position in his job, made the decision to leave school early in order to raise me. He has become incredibly successful and is considered indispensable in his role. He is not only a wonderful father, but also a wonderful husband, far beyond anything my mom deserves. They have been together since school years. Mom gave birth to me at 16, and Dad was 19. I came across photographs of my mother in her younger years, in which she was depicted as an undoubted beauty and received a religious upbringing. It was this religious affiliation that led to her getting married when she became pregnant, so I was convinced throughout my childhood. Later I found out that this story was completely fabricated. About 6 years ago, my mother began to have a disability, which gradually worsened over time. In this regard, she was forced to stop working. Despite the disability allowance, my father worked hard at his job to provide for the needs of our family, in particular to cover the costs of medicines. My mother needs certain medical equipment and devices in connection with her illness, although it is not too severe, and she remains quite independent in most aspects of life, except for financial issues. My father takes care of her financial needs and supports our household. I couldn't help but feel that her infidelity was incredibly disrespectful, especially considering that my father is committed to providing for us by working tirelessly to ensure a better life for our family. He has been working since he was a teenager, and in this situation, I do not know what to do. Despite my mother's infidelity, I still love her because she is my mother. I was turning 17 and preparing for college. By coincidence, my father was due to return home the next day, and we planned to go fishing, as has happened more than once. However, upon arrival, my father often found himself busy with various things, and there was little time for rest. On the other hand, My mother most often showed a lack of motivation, rarely did household chores and cooking, preferring to have dinner in restaurants. Therefore, my father and I took on the responsibilities of cooking and cleaning, explaining her reluctance to the ongoing illness. The reason why she cannot participate in household chores remains unclear. Despite her ability to communicate with people, she is physically able to cook food and do other work, but she prefers not to do any of this, shifting the responsibility to Dad or me. Interestingly, her laziness increases when her father is not around. Instead, she spends most of her time watching TV and seems to shy away from responsibility. In addition, she talked about quitting smoking, but began to act only when my father threatened to leave her. Mom explains her behavior by saying that our grandfather died 5 months ago. I can sympathize and empathize with her situation since, apparently, she smokes to cope with the situation. When my father was at home, her close friend Carol refrained from visiting. I noticed that the number of text messages decreased as I followed them through her iPad. In addition, I came across a conversation in which my father and I were discussing our departure for the upcoming 2-day fishing trip. Finally, after a 3-hour trip on a fishing boat, we arrived at our rented fishing lodge. For the past 2 days, I have been unusually silent during our trip to the hut, absorbed in the difficult task of confessing to my father about my mother's infidelity. The bond between me and my father is much stronger than between me and my mother. He does not get tired of calling me every day, being my support and closest confidant. Over the years, I became imbued with a deep love for nature, which was instilled in me by my father, who brought me to this place from the age of 8. When we came out on a calm lake, the sun was relentlessly beating down on us, accompanied only by the serene sound of water gently beating against the shore. In the boat, I realized that I needed to tell my father about the disturbing discovery I had learned about my mother. Our relationship has always been open, but this case was unlike any other. She could break his heart and break the unity of our family. My heartbeat quickened, and I could hardly find the words. Remembering our conversation, I plucked up the courage and said, "Dad, I need to discuss something with you." And my voice trembled slightly. He answered with a worried look. "Sure, what's bothering you?" "Dad, Mom is cheating on you." When I saw how my father's expression changed, I immediately regretted the words that almost slipped out of my mouth. The pain in his eyes was obvious, and it was clear that my careless remark had touched him to the quick. For a while there was silence in the air. He sat and stared at the water without saying a word. In the end, in a barely audible whisper, he broke the silence and asked what led me to this conclusion. Taking a deep breath, I plucked up the courage and told the truth about the text messages I stumbled upon. As I spoke, the anger in his eyes intensified, confirming that I had indeed touched a sensitive nerve. When I finished, his gaze met mine again, filled with a mixture of emotions that were hard to decipher. As I watched him, tears welled up in his eyes and he looked away. Barely audibly, he uttered a phrase indicating his confidence that she would never change her path. Intrigued, I asked about the meaning of his words. He hesitated for a few moments, apparently searching for words to convey his thoughts. In the end, he began to explain that about 3 years ago, when he began to travel frequently on business trips, my mother asked him to consider the possibility of a free relationship in connection with his long absences. The news stunned me, and I barely kept my composure. If she had followed his example, he believed that she had changed her mind after their quarrel, emphasizing the countless sacrifices he had made for our family. There was a pause, and that was the end of their conversation. When we continued fishing, he stopped talking and looked at the water. His reaction left me with the feeling that there was something unsaid in this story. It was a deep conversation, accompanied by minutes of silence and tears that my father shed. In the end, he plucked up courage and confessed that his love for my mother had decreased compared to what she used to be. About 13 years ago, he made a shocking discovery. Their entire relationship was built on deception. Going back 18 years, he remembered the time when he and my mother met by chance. Unexpectedly for me, my mother got pregnant, and she claimed that at that time, she had only him. This revelation infuriated my maternal grandfather, as he believed that my father took advantage of my mother's innocence and violated her chastity. It is worth noting that at that time both my parents and my maternal grandfather attended the same church. His maternal grandfather approached him with a request for marriage. This was due to the fact that my father impregnated my mother, and according to her, he was the only man she had ever been with. In this regard, my father had to leave college and start performing his male duties. This unexpected change forced him to grow up quickly, turning from an ambitious teenager with the potential for a successful college education into a worker working in a mine on grueling 12-hour shifts every day. After my birth, my father heard perplexing rumors passed on by my mother's ex-girlfriend, who became her enemy. Rumors claimed that during pregnancy, the mother had an affair with another man, which led the father to distrust. It was difficult for him to trust his girlfriend's words, since their relationship had recently soured, and he suspected that she was deliberately spreading lies to harm my mother. At that time, the paternity test was not as accessible as it is now. In this regard, the father turned to his mother, who categorically denied all the accusations and gave various explanations that the ex-girlfriend wanted to tarnish her reputation. My father easily believed in my mother's story and quickly forgot about it, as he had already become deeply attached to me and deeply loved me. He allowed no doubt that I was his son. But 13 years later, he accidentally saw on TV the program The Maurice Show, which talked about the use of the test. Intrigued, he decided to ask this question and eventually passed the test. A few days later, he received results that completely amazed him. It turned out that I am not his son. Instead of discussing the matter with my mother, he decided to suppress his feelings of fear and convinced himself that the test results were incorrect. To further justify his denial, he found articles on the internet in which opportunity testing was portrayed as unreliable and intended only for entertainment and television shows. He kept this secret for another 3 years, until he stumbled upon a televised court case in which the reliability of the results of the opportunity testing was recognized as evidence. Unable to deny the truth any longer, he reluctantly passed another paternity test, which finally confirmed that I am not his biological son. Feeling devastated, he spoke to my mother, who with tears in her eyes confessed that she had relationships with other men and asked for forgiveness. When the father asked about the identity of another person and asked why she did not call him to account, the mother explained the complexity of the situation. She told me that she openly met with my father and at the same time was in a secret relationship with her uncle, the younger brother of her own father. He remained in the dark until the death of her uncle. The illicit relationship ended only after the death of her father's brother. Her mother begged her father not to abandon her and not to reveal her, claiming that she had become a victim. He felt cheated, as if his future had been stolen from him. He believed that he was deprived of the opportunity to study at college and forced to raise a child who biologically belonged to another. Nevertheless, when he looked at me, there was no doubt in his heart that he loved me as if I were his own flesh and blood. In addition, my mother found herself without a choice and had difficulty supporting herself financially. My father, however, decided to keep the relationship, motivating his choice with an innocent child. Despite the pain, he decided to plunge into work to cope with the betrayal. The shift in emphasis led to his promotion and recognition in the mining industry, and he developed this plan even before I found out about my mother's infidelity. When I leave for college, my father plans to end his marriage. He said that he diligently saves money and invested in real estate in Asia, where his friend runs a consulting company. For years, his friend urged him to work abroad as an expatriate, and my father patiently waited for me to graduate before making this fateful decision. It happened about 9 years ago when he made the decision, and since then he has never fully trusted my mother. Their marriage was unhappy, and he suspects that my mother is cheating on him behind his back. Recently, I was convinced of his fears by my own experience. He regretted that he stayed with her, because he believed that he could establish a full life with a woman who sincerely loved him and at the same time be close to me, and not remain trapped in a marriage in which he was deceived. However, at that time he did not have the wisdom to make another choice, and he stayed, believing that it was he who should educate me. Even now, my mother's affair with her uncle remains unsolved, and most of my grandfather's brothers and sisters, including her father, have passed away. 5 months ago, my grandfather passed away, leaving a void in my life. Recently, I discovered an amazing discovery. If my mom's uncle is my biological father, then I have 2 older half-brothers and 1 half-sister, about whom I know nothing, and vice versa. In the midst of this whirlwind of emotions, my father, who is not my biological parent, declared his unwavering willingness to raise me as his own. This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, leaving me speechless and not allowing me to realize its full scale in one day. Although the tears did not flow immediately, a feeling of numbness gripped me until the very end of the day. Did everything really start to fit in my head? We spent the day on board the boat, discussing the events that had taken place. A few days ago, I was thinking about how I would comfort my father about my mother's infidelity. Now the situation has completely changed, forcing me to rethink my entire existence. Throughout my upbringing, I felt only sincere affection for my father, despite the fact that I was not his biological child. I have never felt that I am not his biological son. My father was just a wonderful man. In my eyes, he is the best father in the world. I can't find a single flaw in it. He was always there for me, provided constant support, and served as a wonderful role model. It is very painful for me to realize that my mother used me as a means of manipulating him, but no matter what, my father never left me, and for this, I am eternally grateful to him. After a fishing trip, we decided to talk to my mother about her actions. Throughout the conversation, the father remained calm and collected. When he told her about these messages, I could feel the pain reflected in his eyes. At first, Mom tried to deny the truth, but in the end, under the weight of her guilt, she gave up and admitted that she had engaged in an intimate threesome with her best friend and her boyfriend. To justify her actions, she accused my father of a lack of affection and constant traveling, despite the fact that he did it to support our family. Seeing my mother's face became unbearable, and I realized that our relationship would change forever. As soon as my father found out that I knew everything, the dynamics of our relationship changed irrevocably. Despite her attempts to share her point of view with me, I refused to engage in conversation with her. Surprisingly, she began to accuse my father of manipulating me against her. The situation escalated to such an extent that my mother and I could not coexist under the same roof. Therefore, shortly after our fishing trip, my father had no choice but to start the divorce process. To ease our living conditions, he arranged for us to live in the same apartment until I left for college. After that, he intends to move abroad and get a job as soon as the divorce is formalized. I am looking forward to my trip to meet him on another Earth. This trip had a profound effect on me. To help me recover, my father generously arranged sessions with a therapist for me, and I have been doing this for several months. Now that I'm in college, I told my therapist about this situation, and he encouraged me to write about what happened. The parents' divorce lasted about a month. The house in which we once seemed to live happily was sold, and the money was divided in half between father and mother. Also, the father was awarded to pay alimony to his mother until she gets a job or remarries. I don't want to communicate with my mom and see her ever again. I even blocked her number on my phone. It's been half a year since my parents divorced. My father left for permanent residence in Asia. I'm studying at college and I haven't heard anything about my wayward mother until a certain moment. Recently my father called me and told me that my mother, having never got a job, spent the money earned from the house. She rented a small apartment, enjoyed life going to a restaurant, and connecting with her best friend and her boyfriend. But it didn't last long. Mom confessed to her father that together with her intimacy partners, she used illegal drugs, and her physical condition worsened. There were moments when she could not stand on her feet. After she went to the clinic and was examined, she found out that she is HIV positive. As my father explained, my mother begged him for help. She spent most of the money and needed financial support, but her father told her to turn to her friend and her boyfriend for help. But the mother, sobbing from hopelessness, said that after she expressed her fears that it was they who infected her, they disappeared and did not respond to her calls and messages. My father made the decision not to help my mother and no longer maintain communication with her. For this reason, he called me about my mom's condition so that I would be aware of her affairs. He also said that if I wanted to help her, he wouldn't mind. After listening to my father, I thought for a long time about what to do, but not finding an answer. I just sent her some money and decided to forget that I have a mother. I am a 33-year-old man who dreams of becoming a writer, got carried away with the idea of sharing an incredible plot twist that happened in my life. My wife, who is 29 years old and with whom we have been married for 2 years, betrayed my trust, leaving me in complete despair. But instead of plunging into despair, I directed my emotions to create a story that seems downright fantastic or an exciting film. Our marriage lasted 2 happy years filled with love, satisfaction, and an easy life. Looking forward to the arrival of our first child, Mandy and I were happy to start a joint parenting future. Deeply caring for her well-being, I paid great attention to her health. I diligently maintained stocks of fresh fruit, milk, and vitamins recommended by the doctor. I wanted Mandy to have a perfect physique so that she would have fewer complications and enough energy to carry our child. But Mandy seemed to be somewhat annoyed by my domineering nature and how urgently I demanded to conceive a child. Although it was not my intention to strangle or pressure her, I understood her point of view and refrained from forcing her to change her diet and drink. Several months have passed and Mandy has not been able to get pregnant. Although I felt upset, I decided not to burden her with my emotions. To spare her feelings and not let her get upset, I constantly convinced her that everything was fine and we could try next time. But over time, Mandy's attitude towards me began to change. She became extremely irritable whenever I touched on the topic of her emotions or desires and even suggested therapy as an option. Strangely, this only increased her anger at me and I could not understand what the reason was. But one day, Mandy expressed a desire to attend her friend's wedding in her hometown. I was full of joy, knowing that she would have the opportunity to escape from her usual surroundings and that this would significantly lift her mood. When Mandy went on a trip to her friend's wedding, I saw it as a great opportunity to spend a few days at my mother's house. Our relationship is unusual, it surpasses the usual relationship between mother and son. We are connected by an indissoluble bond that has supported us in both joyful and difficult times. The loss of my father at such a young age of 10 was a difficult ordeal for me. But throughout my life, my mother has always been by my side. She was my constant support. To make it clearer to you, I will say that when I was 20 years old, my mother decided to remarry to Paul, who seemed to her quite a decent person. He treated her with kindness and respect, which made me really happy. It was very nice to see how a person who seemed to me real and caring takes care of my mom. Paul fit seamlessly into our lives, and I sincerely believe that he was a wonderful person. I never had any reason to doubt his intentions, at least that's what I thought. Paul's presence in my mom's life went far beyond the role of a husband. He was actively involved in making her business decisions, which eventually won her trust. To my surprise, I gladly accepted his participation in my mother's life, as it seemed to me useful for a person like me who is still oriented in life. It was very nice to see my mom's newfound happiness. When I came to my mom, Paul was not at home, he left town for work. So my mom and I were alone at home, and I relaxed and enjoyed the tranquility of the moment. Do you know what happens when you experience a special moment of communication with one of your parents? This is a unique connection. But this time Mom looked different. A worried expression appeared on her face and it was obvious that something was bothering her. It was impossible not to notice it. So I couldn't resist asking her what was on her mind. It's not every day you see Mom so serious and anxious. Mom tried to distract herself from the conversation, but I persisted in asking questions until she finally told me what was bothering her. Deep down, she felt that Paul was hiding something from her. The thought that he might be unfaithful crossed her mind. I became curious, and I tried to find out the reason for her suspicions. She talked about how Paul's behavior had changed. He rarely appeared at home, was constantly busy with something else. The emotional connection that once connected me with Paul seemed to be fading, and this made her very sad. I wanted to help my mom, and that's why I asked permission to talk to Paul, but Mom categorically refused me to enter into a conversation with him on this topic. She said that until she had proof of his infidelity, it was stupid to engage in conversation with him. It was hard not to have answers to all the questions, but I decided that Mom was right, and if she needed help, she would definitely turn to me. At that moment, my wife called me and told me that he's coming tomorrow. After completing my short stay with my mom, I hopefully returned to our apartment. I was hoping Mandy would be in a good mood and our relationship would improve. Unfortunately, upon arrival, she looked tired and felt a hidden irritation towards me. Trying to defuse the situation, I asked to show all the photos that she could have taken during my absence. To my surprise, she stated that she had not captured a single moment on her phone. It seemed unusual to me because Mandy usually loved to take pictures and record short videos to preserve precious memories. Despite my curiosity, I refrained from further questions. After a few days, she would start getting mad at me again, which made me perplexed. Despite the fact that I tried to mitigate the situation, I did not put pressure on her about the birth of a child, encouraged healthy eating, and refrained from any aggressive actions. I could not understand the reason for her anger. Curiosity made me ask the reason for her rude behavior, to which she told about her depression related to the inability to conceive a child, and loaded herself with self-flagellation. Trying to comfort her, I assured her that there was no need to worry, and expressed confidence that everything would fall into place. In addition, I suggested contacting a well-known gynecologist to assess the state of her reproductive health. But she refused my offer, and insisted that she needed time before going to the doctor. There was an impression that she was doubtful, perhaps fearing to get a difficult diagnosis, not being psychologically ready for it. As a result, we decided to postpone this topic, and our relationship returned to its usual course. Trying to distract her from these experiences, I advised Mandy to look for a job, or do some useful activity for her. But she expressed satisfaction that I was providing for her, and showed no interest in the work. Despite this, our relationship remained stable. There was no friction or reason for Mandy to be upset, but within 1 month she expressed a desire to visit her siblings. I mentioned that she had recently left town, which apparently angered her and led to an outburst of anger. Mandy accused me of insensitivity, and that I forbid her to see her brothers and sisters. I explained that I wasn't trying to stop her, but just commented on her recent trip. Unfortunately, she did not respond positively to my comment. I shouldn't have made any comments about her whereabouts, but she left anyway, taking with her the same resentment and anger at me. A few days later, my mom contacted me and asked me to come to me since Paul was also away. It seemed strange to me, since the last time Paul and Mandy happened to be out of town at the same time. I was surprised by this repeated coincidence. I asked my mom to come and spend a week with me. Despite my invitation, she was still concerned about Paul's fidelity and had not yet found any evidence to make a claim against him. According to her, Paul was friendly with her, but rarely spent time at home, which made her suspect him of infidelity. I tried to calm her down by suggesting that maybe he was busy with his friends or work, which might explain his limited presence at home. I offered Mom to spend a delightful vacation abroad with Paul. Unfortunately, Mom decided to interrupt her trip with me and return home 2 days later. Meanwhile, I diligently contacted Mandy every day, but she was extremely annoyed and did not communicate with me properly. Despite the fact that I have repeatedly offered my sincere apologies to her, Mandy remained unchanged in her behavior. I even offered to come to visit her and meet her brothers and sisters, but she was very offended and categorically refused my request to visit her brother's house. Mandy informed me that she would be back in a few days and kindly asked me to refrain from visiting without warning. Despite her request, I insisted on spending 2 days together, but she repeatedly refused and assured me of her imminent return. Mandy's peculiar behavior puzzled me and significantly distracted me from work. Since I was working remotely due to my poor health, I desperately needed a painkiller. So I decided to open Mandy's desk drawer. She keeps painkillers and antipyretic pills in a drawer. Curiosity made me open the drawer and rummage through its contents, hoping to find relief from the headache tormenting me there. To my surprise, I came across something that not only increased my headache, but also made me feel deeply offended and deceived. Among the items in the drawer were birth control pills that belonged to Mandy. These pills, hidden unnoticed under other objects, destroyed my dreams of starting a family with her. It was painful for me to realize that although Mandy had convincingly expressed her enthusiasm for our shared desire to have children, she was secretly taking birth control behind my back. To prevent pregnancy, I resented her for her actions. It would have been easier for me to accept if she had reported that she was not ready for the birth of a child. There was no need to deceive me by making me believe every month that she could share the pregnancy news. I really wanted to talk to Mandy and ask her about birth control pills and wanting to have a baby. When Mandy arrived, she sensed my anxious state and asked me about what was bothering me. I immediately asked her about the duration of her deception. She turned pale and stared at me in disbelief. Then I told her that I know that she uses contraceptives. She admitted that she was worried about the prospect of pregnancy and a huge responsibility for it. There were days when we didn't communicate with each other, and it seemed to suit her. And although I longed for her to join in the conversation and apologize for playing with my emotions, she didn't seem bothered by the lack of communication. Perhaps she was even glad that I was silent. When I got home from work a week or two later, Mandy wasn't home. Instead of inquiring about her whereabouts or expected return, I decided to do some home repairs that required attention. Going to the pantry for tools, I came across an ancient cell phone that once belonged to Mandy. Out of curiosity, I turned it on, but found that the battery charge is catastrophically low. Surprisingly, all of Mandy's data remained intact and easily accessible. I found out that from the very beginning of our marriage, my wife cheated on me with my stepfather Paul. The revelation of her connection with both at the same time caused me a feeling of extreme disgust. Their flirtation began shortly after our wedding, with my stepfather taking on the role of her benefactor, showering her with financial support and generous gifts. Over time, Mandy even went so far as to offer to divorce us and marry my stepfather, as if their union was their only goal. Paul was incredibly deceitful, to the point of denying his wealth and pretending to rely on the income from my mother's business. It became clear that he did not feel sincere affection for my mother, but was interested only in her wealth, unlike himself. He shamelessly took advantage of both my mother's financial resources and my wife's physical attractiveness. Anger was growing in me. My blood was boiling from the obvious betrayal committed by my stepfather. The desire to pick up the phone and tell my mother about everything completely consumed me. I was thinking about removing the unpleasant dog, Paul, from her life and from her mother's house. But before taking any hasty action, I decided to conduct a thorough investigation. So I started rummaging through her closet, in the hope of finding something that might give me valuable thoughts. To my satisfaction, my intuition turned out to be correct. As it turned out, Mandy and Paul had a shared account, which Mandy seemed to use without any restrictions. But this was not the most surprising discovery. I also discovered a hidden collection of cash and luxury items hidden in her closet. Realizing how much I trusted her while she was playing with my emotions and entering into a 2-year affair with my stepfather was a crushing blow. Just the thought that Paul and Mandy were plotting to deceive me and my mother only increased my anger. Most likely they thought they were incredibly smart, deceiving all of us, and at the same time indulging in their illicit relationships. I was determined to make them feel the same pain they caused me. It's time to teach Mandy a valuable lesson. I've withdrawn all funds from Mandy's and my shared account. In the past, I regularly contributed a significant amount to this account to implement our plans for the future, and Mandy had the right to dispose of this money at her discretion. But since I wanted to break off relations with her and deprive her of the opportunity to claim any rights to this account, I decided to completely empty it, leaving no residue. After that, I filed for divorce. Mandy would have been left without any support, including a monthly allowance or a stable life situation. Paul made it clear that he also did not have the financial means to help Mandy. This meant that she was free to make her own choices and decisions. Personally, I could not accept that a woman who contacted my stepfather would live in my house and count on my support. Now let me explain my plan regarding Paul. I called my mom and told her that Mandy and I were going to her house for a regular dinner. When we arrived, Mom and Paul greeted us warmly, unaware of the reason for my unexpected visit. But as soon as I caught a glimpse of Paul's face, an irresistible desire to vent my anger arose inside me. I wanted to throw something at his evil smile and see how he would suffer. But nevertheless, we all sat down to dinner, and I couldn't help but notice how easily and naturally Paul and Mandy communicate with each other. They exchanged laughter and jokes, seemed completely at ease in each other's presence. There was a relaxed communication in them, reminiscent of a meeting of two close friends. But what really struck me was my mother's complete ignorance of the secret game unfolding in front of her. She did not notice the secret actions of her husband and daughter-in-law. Taking advantage of the moment, I unceremoniously offered to watch a movie together after dinner. After describing an old movie with an exciting plot and an amazing ending, I quietly connected a USB drive to my mother's TV. Messages exchanged between Paul and Mandy began to appear on the screen, accompanied by several pictures capturing their intimate moments. In these pictures, they were captured in bed too close to each other, or engaged in clearly inappropriate actions. The whole room was in complete shock. Mom was completely stunned, her jaw was almost touching the floor. She just couldn't understand that her husband, her longtime life partner, was cheating on her with her daughter-in-law. And as for Mandy? Well, her actions speak volumes. She stood there completely stunned. The reality that unfolded before her eyes was unimaginable. She was struck by a sudden blow and was in a state of shock. Meanwhile, Paul, as befits a disgusting person, was trying to regain his composure. Having plucked up the courage, he started shouting at me, accusing me of inventing wild stories to turn my mother against him. He continued to shout and humiliate me, claiming that I had made up disgusting stories. But I presented him with evidence, messages and images extracted from Mandy's phone, confirming my words. The authenticity of these images was not questioned, but Paul, as befits his nature, constantly denied their existence and tried to convince my mother of his innocence. Taking matters into her own hands, my mother slapped him hard in the face and demanded that he leave immediately. Being in a state of shock, Mandy tried to enter into a conversation with me, trying to explain herself. But considering everything that had opened up, it was simply unbearable for me to even look at her, let alone engage in conversation. I wasn't interested in listening to what she had to say to me. It would be better if she just left and never crossed paths with me again. After the divorce, Mandy and I went our separate ways, and I don't know anything about her current endeavors. To be honest, I'm happy that I don't know. We made plans for our future together, but her betrayal completely changed our course. She had the opportunity to remain faithful, create a family, and live with me in comfortable conditions. But she chose to destroy our marriage by entering into a relationship with a much older man solely for the sake of money, which rightfully belongs to my mother. If Mandy had told me about Paul's unsolicited advances from the very beginning, I would have immediately severed the relationship between him and my mother. Since then, my mother divorced Paul, and he found himself in a difficult financial situation. In order to make ends meet and cover the costs of rent and food, he now moonlights in various jobs. Previously, Paul led a comfortable lifestyle thanks to the love and care of my mother. Unlike the domineering spouse, Mom was affectionate and caring towards him. My mother, who constantly reminded her husband of her higher income and wealth, may have caused Paul's infidelity. He thought that her love for her blinded her, but I'm glad that in the end she realized what a terrible person he really was. The whole situation affected me deeply, because I not only lost my wife and the opportunity to start a family, but also witnessed the huge impact she had on my mother. Unlike me, who can count on new acquaintances and marriage, he bears the brunt of the emotional consequences. After the death of her first husband, and the betrayal of the second, my mother withdrew into herself, burdened by the weight of what she had experienced. Worried about her well-being, I advised her to see a therapist to regain strength and recover. It was hard to see her in such a state, but life does not stand still for anyone. She continues to move forward. Deep down, I sincerely hope that my mom will find happiness again. Thanks to her perseverance, I believe that she will be able to build her life based on her own needs and desires, freed from people who don't care about her. Although I doubt her ability to handle this process, I am sure she will overcome it and become even stronger. Growing up in a charming town, I was fascinated by the love I shared with my high school sweetheart. Our future seemed to me like a beautiful melody, reminiscent of a perky country song. Being the first for each other, we spent 5 happy years together. The idea of proposing to her loomed on the horizon. Everything had to fall into place, studying at the same college and exchanging vows. But fate decreed otherwise. Everything collapsed one fateful night when I stumbled upon her in the toilet of a nightclub in the company of a promoter. At that moment, my heart broke into a million pieces. Unfortunately, this incident was only the beginning of a series of subsequent heartbreaking events. The wounds inflicted on me by this experience have left indelible scars, shaping my perception of women and leaving me on guard throughout my adult life. Let me list some of the most unpleasant cases that have left me feeling completely confused. There was a moment in our relationship when my then-girlfriend expressed her sharp rejection of infidelity. We watched the movie together, and when one of the characters on the screen betrayed his wife, she said that cheating should entail serious consequences. I remember looking at her, convinced that she was the embodiment of my innermost desires and aspirations. But fate played a cruel trick on me. In the most unexpected place, I found her in a public toilet, and this sight destroyed my idea of our relationship. I couldn't imagine that she could betray me. Our families have been friends for many years and trusted each other unconditionally. They believed so much that she could even spend the night at my place without raising her eyebrows. Our loved ones firmly believed that our union was predetermined. When she turned 20, something in her seemed to change overnight. Suddenly, she wanted a life filled with parties and club life. Unfortunately, before reaching the age of 21, we could not get into those clubs that aroused her interest. I didn't mind waiting until I was of age, but she insisted on getting a fake ID. I expressed my concerns about the risk, but she didn't calm down. A few weeks later, she came with a surprisingly authentic identity. When I asked where she got it, she named a guy who made fake IDs for some of her friends. Despite my doubts, I agreed to make a fake ID so that we could go to clubs together. I was more at home, so I didn't like the club life. The world of loud music and noisy crowds, although not to my taste, was becoming more and more attractive to her. She seemed to have an insatiable desire to explore it all. When I expressed my doubts about joining her in an environment filled with pills and alcohol, she called me boring. According to her, this is the quintessential experience for young people, and we should not miss it just because her friends indulge. Trying to put her happiness at the forefront, I reluctantly agreed to go with her, putting aside my doubts. I did my best to make our evening happen, even persuaded a close friend to join us and purchased fake IDs for both of us. But fate had other plans. The following Friday, I suddenly fell ill and could not come. I assumed that my girlfriend would cancel our plans too, but to my surprise, she decided to go with one of her friends. It was at this time that I noticed a change in her behavior, and even the choice of friends became different. The next week, as soon as I came to my senses, we planned a date again, this time accompanied by my best friend. When we came to the club, I was seized with anxiety. I was afraid that our fake documents would not pass verification. However, to my immense relief, the bouncer barely glanced at them before allowing us to enter. I didn't know then that this institution had gained notoriety due to careless document verification, which eventually led to its closure for selling alcohol to minors. As soon as we were inside, a red flag caught my attention. The enthusiasm of my girlfriend, waving her hand to a tall, impeccably dressed gentleman standing at the entrance, aroused my suspicions. In response, he winked at her, and she smiled broadly in response. When we settled down at the club, my girlfriend casually mentioned that the man she waved to was just a promoter. Despite the fact that I felt a pang of jealousy, I tried to delve into this topic. Because of the deafening music, conversation was almost impossible. It seemed that behind the noise she did not hear my question, and left it unanswered. We continued to get drinks and immerse ourselves in a lively atmosphere, following the crowd. The more we enjoyed the booze, the more we liked the music. My friend and I began to dance and get great pleasure from what was happening. In the midst of this fun, I suddenly realized that my girlfriend was nowhere to be found. Concerned about the sudden disappearance of my girlfriend, I asked my friend if he had seen her. He informed me that she had gone to the toilet. Time passed, and she still did not appear, and we decided to go upstairs. There were rumors that there was another bar on the top floor, which offers a stunning view of the city. We intended to find out everything quickly, and go back downstairs until my friend noticed our absence and started looking for us. Going up to the top floor, we found a quieter lounge area lined with comfortable sofas. The open roof muffled the noise coming from below, and created a calmer atmosphere. As we headed to the bar, my attention was caught by a girl sitting in the corner who looked remarkably like my friend. She was deep in conversation with the same guy we had noticed earlier at the entrance. Intrigued, I cautiously approached them to find out her identity. To my relief, it was really her. I intervened, demanding that my girlfriend come with us immediately. The guy just smiled in response, and my girlfriend was visibly annoyed, as if I interrupted an important moment. Driven by curiosity, I asked about his personality and their connection. In response to my question, she explained that she wanted to provide us with access to the VIP section, emphasizing that this guy is a well-known club promoter who enjoys wide popularity. She assured me that his numerous girlfriends do not pose a threat to our relationship. Expressing my disappointment, I expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that she suddenly left without informing us of her whereabouts. I made it clear in no uncertain terms that I wanted her to stay close to me and not engage in further communication with this person. Unfortunately, my concerns were met with accusations of jealousy and control, resulting in a heated argument between us. Leaving my girlfriend in the company of a friend on the corner, I went to the bar to buy drinks for us. When I returned, I found that she was deep in her phone, texting with someone. At that moment, my friend left, referring to the fact that he needed to go to the toilet located downstairs, and left me alone with my girlfriend, who was still silent after our previous quarrel. After a few minutes, she abruptly rose from her seat, thereby indicating her intention to leave. Perplexed, I asked where she was going, to which she replied with a note of sarcasm that she was going to the toilet. Sensing my distrust, she invited me to join her. I decided to ignore her remark as she left angrily. Now I found myself alone, patiently waiting for the return of my friend and girlfriend. After a while, my friend came back with a big smile on his face. I asked him the reason for his fun, and he told me about the incident that happened to him in the toilet. It turns out that when he was washing his hands, he accidentally overheard the intimate sounds of a couple in one of the stalls. Being familiar with unpredictable situations in clubs, we both found this story very funny and laughed at it. But suddenly, a sudden impulse made me hurry down the stairs and see this sight with my own eyes. Being relatively new to the world of club entertainment, I often heard stories about such cases and even met reports about them on the internet. The curiosity to experience this on my own did not give me peace of mind. Turning to a friend, I asked him to take me to the toilet, after which I quickly went downstairs, hoping to have time to see what was happening before it was over. When I got to the toilet, I was in line for a moment. The atmosphere was chaotic, filled with stormy conversations and the laughter of an intoxicated crowd. I noticed about 6 cubicles in the toilet, but there was no trace of the intimate sounds described by my friend. A doubt crept into my head. Is my friend teasing me? To dispel my suspicions, I decided to use the urinal that stood next to the booths. When I relieved myself, the door of one of the booths suddenly opened, and I instinctively glanced over my shoulder to determine who had appeared. To my complete amazement, my girlfriend came out of the booth, busy correcting her dress, and right behind her, to my complete shock, was the promoter, hastily buckling his belt. The shock was so strong that I didn't realize that I had accidentally started urinating on my own pants. Not believing my eyes, I called out to my friend, demanding an explanation about her connection with the promoter. Caught off guard by my unexpected discovery, she was momentarily speechless. In the end, she squeezed out a weak response, accusing me of putting her in an awkward position. Can you imagine? Just a few minutes ago, she came out of the men's room, doing, well, you know what? And at the same time, she had the audacity to claim that I was the cause of her humiliation. Choking with anger and resentment, I hurled a barrage of insults at her, further increasing her embarrassment. As our argument flared up, the people around us found fun in it, laughed and made fun of us. I didn't notice how the promoter of the club disappeared unnoticed in this chaos. Overcome with anger and resentment, I told my girlfriend to leave with the promoter she was communicating with, and categorically stated that our relationship was over. In a fit of irritation, I rushed upstairs and immediately informed my friend that it was time for us to leave. He followed, persistently asking about the situation with my girlfriend, but I decided to keep him in the dark until we reached the car. He was completely perplexed when I told him that the girl he overheard doing intimate activities in the men's room was actually my girlfriend. How could she betray me like that? The sight of her coming out of the toilet continued to haunt my thoughts, repeating over and over again. Anger gripped me, and I couldn't resist cursing her throughout the entire trip home after dropping off my friend. To top it all off, she got the nerve and called me, asking why I left her at the club. In response, I offered her new boyfriend to take her home. Arriving at my home, I found that I could not sleep and spent the whole night without sleep, overcome by a whirlwind of emotions. I ignored the persistent call, even though I knew I should have made a move and blocked her number. It was not as easy as it seemed to turn it off completely. There were difficulties that did not allow me to break all ties. At the same time, anger raged in me, preventing me from communicating with her in any form. The next morning, to my surprise, she appeared on my doorstep, desperately asking me for forgiveness and explaining her actions by alcohol intoxication. I was overcome with curiosity, and I asked how often they meet, to which she replied that it was only once. But I later learned from her friends that she had visited this club several times before our ill-fated joint visit. It became clear to me that this case was not the only one. This discovery shocked me to the core. The mental pain was so deep that it affected my appetite, and I could not eat properly for several days. Concerned about my well-being, my parents intervened in the situation, and I finally told them about the betrayal I had experienced. In response, they took matters into their own hands and informed her parents, who subsequently seized her fake ID. As a result, an acute quarrel arose between her and her parents, which led to her expulsion from home. Soon after, rumors began to spread, which were increasingly distorted, and people began to falsely claim that many men had entered into inappropriate relationships with her. The source and origin of these embellishments remained a mystery to me. As a result, she gained notoriety in our society, which forced her to move to another place. The incident in the toilet of the club strained her relationship with her parents, causing constant tension. The fact that she was labeled as a girl engaged in explicit actions in the men's room was not only a source of deep humiliation for her, but also reflected on me after our separation. To avoid the shame and drama associated with this, I made the difficult decision to leave my familiar surroundings, leaving my loved ones. I went on a trip to a new state, deciding to start all over again and prioritize my personal growth. My main goal was to focus on myself and not enter into any relationship. I remained firm in my decision. As a student, I took a carefree approach to dating, avoiding any connections and serious obligations. I enjoyed my bachelor status, enjoyed socializing with different girls, and got great pleasure from it. When, after graduating from university, I moved into the professional world, thoughts about my ex-girlfriend remained in the past. In order not to go to family events alone, I often took the girls I was dating with me, but my family didn't really like them because of their tattoos and unconventional way of dressing. Despite their wild nature, these city girls attracted me because I preferred their authenticity to the pretentiousness that my cheating ex-girlfriend demonstrated. In the end, when I got a job, I was lucky enough to meet an extraordinary woman at my workplace. She has made a profound transformation in my life. At first there were no alarm signals, and I allowed myself to become vulnerable again. However, after a few months, the constant feeling of anxiety began to push me to fear that she might be wrong. Anxiety increased to panic attacks and other unpleasant symptoms. Having plucked up the courage, I told her about my fears, but not surprisingly, she categorically denied that she was wrong. A few more months passed without any visible problems. She even met my family and friends, who received her surprisingly warmly. Such a positive reception contrasted sharply with my previous experience when I did not have a relationship with any of those with whom I met after the ex who betrayed my trust. Despite these positive signs, I still had a feeling of doubt. After a considerable time, I finally got into her confidence and allowed her to move in with me. At first, our cohabitation went smoothly without any hitches. Soon disturbing, obsessive thoughts appeared in my head. She skillfully manipulated me, making me doubt my sanity, pushing me to the idea of hospitalization in a psychiatric clinic. A doubt crept into me, making me believe that I was just projecting past traumas onto my current relationship. I desperately tried to convince myself that these fears were groundless. Perhaps it was the fruit of my ghostly past. And even the people around me responded in kind, urging me to drop these disturbing thoughts. In November 2021, we received a positive pregnancy test. Considering that this is my first child, I was overjoyed. But in December 2021, after only a few weeks, the anxious feelings returned. I started digging into her social media and was shocked by what I found. It turned out that she cheated on me for about 11 months. I immediately downloaded all the chat logs and logged into all the accounts available to me. I have not found any concrete evidence of physical contact. Our relationship got to the point where the only form of infidelity I could detect was the exchange of explicit photos, which, in my personal opinion, was still a breach of trust. In addition, she shamelessly posted my intimate photos and videos without my consent and even attracted other people to it. Every day I learned more and more unpleasant facts, and she stubbornly insisted that there was nothing else, assuring me that she had no reason to deceive me. It is shocking that she even had the audacity to say that I have no right to know about all her actions. And I was tormented by doubts about the paternity of the child. I was again in uncertainty and doubt. Despite a thorough investigation, I could not find any concrete evidence that she had a physical relationship with someone else. Nevertheless, I could not get rid of doubts about the paternity of the child. It is difficult to understand whether these doubts were rational or whether I simply succumbed to irrational fears. At that time, she was still in the first trimester of pregnancy, and the thought that she needed to wait for childbirth to gain clarity is painful. I sincerely would like to find happiness with her and raise our child together, but these nagging doubts did not stop tormenting me. It was also depressing that I was once again faced with a similar situation, forcing me to think about whether all women are capable of such actions, or I just have an extraordinary streak of failures. I couldn't just rely on her testimony, even in the most difficult circumstances. Even if I was on the verge of death, I doubt very much that she would have confessed the truth to me. Thanks to my professional experience in conducting interrogations, I have a talent for recognizing lies, but it turned out to be a formidable test. It is even more difficult when it is not about a stranger, but about a loved one. But I still felt that she was hiding important information. I was completely at a loss and didn't know what to do next. Trying to find a break and gain clarity, I decided to leave my house for a while and take refuge with a friend. Despite her sincere request to return, I insisted on the need for a prenatal paternity test. She expressed her concerns, claiming that such a test could harm the child's health. To allay her fears, I conducted extensive research on the internet and shared with her the information I received, effectively refuting her claims. After a few days of conversation, she agreed to take the test. To my surprise, the results showed that I am not the biological father of the child. When I found out about this, I demanded that she leave my house. Despite my decision, she still wanted to stay with me. She explained her reluctance to terminate the pregnancy with her personal views. I confronted her by asking if the novel contradicted the same beliefs. This revelation left her at a loss. I made it clear to her that her decision to keep or terminate the pregnancy made no sense to me. The main thing was that she had to leave my house before the next day. As a result, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, as evidenced by the absence of any signs of pregnancy after 3 months. Despite this turn of events, we continued to work together at the same place for another 5 months. Before I decided to look for another job, she persistently tried to reconcile with me. But I have never been able to forgive her betrayal, and now I can trust any woman. They're all cheaters to me.